अस्सलाम वालेकुम टू एवरीबडी। हमारे साथ इस वक्त कुछ मेहमान भी हैं एंड देन लंदन से डॉक्टर नज़ीर गिलानी भी हैं, प्रोमिनेंट कश्मीरी ज्यूरिस्ट, और पिछले दिनों से कुछ अरसे से, ख़ास तौर पर मतलब 1.5 साल हो गया है जिस किस्म की ख़बरें कश्मीर से आ रही थी, सो वी थॉट दिस वाज the right time to highlight some of the issues that have cropped up as a consequence in the aftermath of the August 5, 2019 actions, illegal actions by the Indian government. So we designed this webinar. I thought I should just give a very brief rundown. I'll be moderating the session. I'll just try to give an overview of what is happening in Srinagar based on conversations with a few Kashmiri friends based in Srinagar itself. Wahan se, then we have a compact audio message also from Srinagar. So I'll just complete my presentation. Then we have a video message also from the president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, Sardar Masood Khan, who despite his best efforts couldn't join us here live, and just because of he's stuck in official meetings, but he was kind enough to send us a video message which we will play here. And then in the end, I'll pass on the baton to Dr. Nazir Gilani, who has been a very ardent advocate of the jurisprudence of the Kashmir issue and has regularly, every year, twice a year, represented Kashmiris and his case at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. And then we'll see whoever has joined us, maybe some other Kashmiris, then we will open the session to question and answer. So I would kick off by saying that, what is happening right now in India itself, that one after the other, Indian lies and deception are basically coming to the light, whether it is Kashmir or whether it is Pakistan. The Indian Chronicles set the stage for that by this European Union Disinfo Lab, I think, has made an extensive, eye-opening work on what India had been doing to the image of Pakistan abroad and how it has poisoned the international opinion on Pakistan. Now, Arnab Goswami of the Republic TV has made quite waves. His WhatsApp chat with an Indian rating agency CEO has basically sent ripples across India. And today, Arnab Goswami responded to Pakistan's call to the international community to critically look at and assess all Pakistan-specific India actions, whether at home or abroad. Now, it's a very fair call by Pakistan in the context of these two startling events, that is the Indian Chronicles and Arnab Goswami's WhatsApp chat with the CEO of the rating agency. Now, this has obviously triggered a very hot debate within India as well. Arnab Goswami's Republic TV today issued a statement, an official statement in response to Pakistani government's demands regarding the leaked WhatsApp chat on the Pulwama terror attack and the Balakot airstrikes in February last year. It has not only attempted, as usual, to dump everything on Pakistan, basically holding Pakistan responsible for a lot of things that are happening because of the internal contradictions of the Indian ruling party and its ally RSS. It has even warned the Congress party to not work in tandem, what they say, in tandem with the government of Pakistan, consciously, unconsciously, to spread what the statement by the Republic TV on behalf of Arnab Goswami says lies against India's interests. It's quite an interesting situation, which may come to haunt come back to haunt Narendra Modi and his allies. Former Minister of the Indian Congress, Yashwant Sinha, for instance, has said that through a tweet that Arnab chats clearly established that BJP's victory in 2019 elections was contrived and national security was used as an excuse to win votes. It's deplorable, Yashwant Sinha says. How low can a party descend to grab power? Can winning elections by hook or by crook be a party's supreme goal? There's a big question mark. And then there was a tweet by Suhasini Haider, a very prominent journalist in India. And she says, in response to the Republic TV's statement on Pakistan, that instead of addressing only Pakistan, the channel should answer questions in India over how it received early information about the Balakot strikes and how many people besides the BARC chief were told of it. So it's quite a very simple question, but if answered, it could possibly entail a lot of details and expose many people, many faces. Now, all this is happening basically to the context of August 2019, when India extended its illegal occupation of Kashmiris on the way to disempowering them. I mean, this is the basic theme of my submission is this is a move essentially to disempower and disenfranchise local Kashmiris. And I'm thankful also to Dr. Nazir Gilani and Justice Gilani as well in Muzaffarabad. They've been sensitizing us on all this, that what has happened post-August 2019 is a political lockdown, digital lockdown, military crackdown, socio-political suppression, and accompanied by fake encounters to eliminate youth. There have been dozens of fake encounters in which several dozen young people have been killed in the last 2 years or so. Now, this appears to be leading to a meltdown of socio-political forces in the valley, where literally every section of the society, that is politicians, socio-political activists, students, women, have been forced into silence. Let us first now hear a message from Srinagar. Despite an acute digital lockdown, I requested my friends there to put together something so that our friends here and on the web can listen to the desperate voices from within Srinagar. So I'll request my colleague Uruba just to play that audio message from our friends, from these Kashmiri friends in Srinagar. Uruba?
The RSS school of thought has already made its way into Kashmir. First of all, officially, because the officials holding the key posters in Kashmir are from RSS, all non-state subjects. And then they have started making their entry on ground level along the borders, particularly in Muslim majority areas. The only motive is to control the areas through, not directly through state machinery, but through these radical hooligans, but by their motto can be and most probably is to infiltrate to the other part of the border and create problems over there. The most devastating change that they have brought in the abrogation of Article 35A by changing the domicility in Jammu and Kashmir. The permanent state subjects, which are the Kashmiris, the Muslims, Panditas, Sikhs, the Dogras, the Bagrawals and Gujars, and the Rajputs, who are the basic citizens and the basic state subjects of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now they have made a change to it, a very significant change, whereby they have changed the domicile nature by simply abrogating one of the articles, 35A, that decides and describes who is the domicile, who is the state subject of Jammu and Kashmir. The basic thing for them is to settle people here, settle outsiders here, and settle them permanently by making them owners of this land, which they were not able to be before the application of Article 35A. Since the occupational machinery in Kashmir consists of more than 7 lakh Indian forces and thousands of Indian officials, it is estimated it's almost about 1.74 million Indian workers. They are eligible for this domicile. And why do they want to do it? Because they want to simply change the nature of the majority, the nature of being a Muslim majority state, occupied state. And this establishment of these protected colonies for outsiders and special economic zones and on forcibly acquired land, you can imagine a Palestine, but only harsher and more brutal. Our savings, our assets in the banks are not secure anymore, and they can be frozen or seized without any prior warning. The condition of healthcare, hospitals is degraded day by day, forcing people to move out of the state to seek better healthcare.
Is it over?
And seeking better healthcare in India. The shift towards domicile status is a clear path to demographic change. The order in itself is retrospective, means that it includes those who already meet these requirements. The situation is not going to be normal for us here in the valley anytime soon. Harsh and punishing measures are being taken against us. A complete crackdown on all existing Islamic institutions and organizations, criminalization and character assassination of our key religious leaders across all sects. The aim of this exercise is to simply break our faith, malign the character of a Kashmiri Muslim, reinforce Islamophobia, create apologists, and to build a narrative that Kashmir has been a problem because of corrupt Muslims. There is crackdown on writers, poets, musicians, orators, artists, who will reflect in any way upon the nefarious designs and brutality.
I can't
Media organizations, journalists are either compromised or criminalized. The judiciary and law enforcement is being further complicated to prolong the process of release of Kashmiri political prisoners in particular, and civilians in general. Artificial intelligence is being heavily used for online surveillance and predicting social behavior. Big data analysis overlays are being created on traffic monitoring and surveillance cameras. And data generated through smart city projects is being used for social engineering.
Sir, now it's over.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ruba. So it was a long statement, but we compressed it. We took out the most relevant part that concerns the abrogation of the Article 35A and the consequences. Now, a Kashmiri journalist who doesn't want to be identified, and she wrote the following lines, for this webinar in particular, a very passionate description of the situation in Kashmir, where she says nearly 12 million people living in a state of siege, where kids have not seen school for almost 18 months, youth have to hide somewhere in the wilderness to evade arrests and slaughter, women have to carry the dead bodies of their sons to the burial grounds, and where men suffer frisking and humiliations almost on a daily basis. This is quite a passionate writing. I just took a few things from here. Now, coming to the last part, I would say what is actually happening in the illegally Indian occupied Kashmir since August 2009. It is a direct assault on the Kashmiriyat, led by the proponents of the BJP and RSS-led Hindutva policy, blatant systemic attempt to change the Muslim character of Kashmir under the garb of terrorism or Islamic terrorism. This is what our journalist friend also referred to. Now, how is it happening? Well, they're using the newly enforced laws which have paved way for settlement of non-locals, RSS activists, armed cadres, real estate developers, industrialists, students, and members of the security forces. Now, what are the objectives? Primarily two major objectives. Number one is to outnumber locals, or at least dilute local population with the presence of non-locals to create firewalls against the legitimate struggle for rights. more than 100 central laws have been enacted. They are designed to systematically disempower indigenous Muslim population from land to employment, affecting their livelihoods, how they live every day. Traders, lawyers, journalists, civil activists, and politicians, young kids, and women are forced to write bonds for keeping silent and accepting disempowerment of their basic rights. Now, the consequence? Already many forced evictions and demolitions of their dwellings in every district of the valley is happening. Nearly 1 million poor nomads, which our friend from Srinagar also mentioned, Gujars and Bakarwals, have become the latest victims of this policy. Their cattle sheds, mud houses, and in remote forests have been demolished and forced to spend the harsh winter without shelter. So they have been forced to take shelter elsewhere. Now, media estimates point to the presence in the Indian occupied Kashmir of 1 million soldiers, 500,000 laborers, 300,000 Hindutva workers, which, including their families, look to be enough to eventually outnumber the 8 to 12 million Muslim population of Kashmir over a certain period of time. Some people reckon that only after 5 years, the Muslims will be reduced to a minority, which is the main agenda of the BJP government. Now, the second possible consequence, and which is very scary for us all, in fact, a major worry, that is the possible infiltration into Azad Kashmir, particularly of RS cadres in the garb of Kashmiri Muslims. There are reports that buses carrying thousands of RSS workers last year have been asked to settle near the line of control areas. A few years back, the reports about issuing citizenship certificates to non-Muslims near the border got blacked out, and that process is going on as we don't hear anything real substantial out of the valley because of the lockdown. Now, India may create conditions which may look legitimate for local residents to flee, and many of those residents are not native Kashmiris anymore. They are the RSS cadres or perhaps the Indian security establishment agents who could be instrumental in not only fanning trouble in Azad Kashmir, but also being used as proxy victims of Pakistan's policies. You know, this is how the Indian media would play up, and this is how this Indian chronicles have been doing all over the world, projecting even very minor things as something big that Pakistan may have done. So that is, here I would end. I think I've taken enough time. What I would do now, I think we have this a message, video recorded message from the president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, Sardar Masood Khan. I request our colleague Uruba to play Sardar Masood Khan's message.
Mr. Imtiaz Gul, Executive Director, Center for Research and Security Studies, Dr. Nazir Gilani, and other participants of the webinar. I want to thank Mr. Imtiaz Gul for organizing this timely webinar, focusing on the most serious crisis in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir right now. As we all know, on August the 5th, 2019, India invaded and reoccupied IOK and laid siege to the occupied territory. Today is the 533rd day of that colonial chokehold on the people of the occupied territory of Jammu and Kashmir. In the meantime, India has illegally divided the state into two parts and annexed it to the Indian Federation against the wishes of the people of Jammu and Kashmir and without their consent. The Indian forces and the occupation authorities have been systematically killing, torturing, forcibly disappearing, and incarcerating people in the occupied territory. They target and kill young men and thousands of political activists are in concentration camps. Rape and sexual violence against women have been weaponized to punish the entire nation of Jammu and Kashmir in order to deter them from demanding freedom and self-determination. But the biggest crime the occupation forces and authorities have been committing in this past year is systematic but totally illegal demographic changes in the occupied territory. Since April last year, more than 2 million Hindus from India have been imported and transferred to the occupied territory. This too is against the wishes of the people. The Indian leaders have made it clear that they would increase this number to more than 5 million in a very short period of time. The international humanitarian law and norms of customary international law applicable to this crime are very clear. The Fourth Geneva Convention prohibits deportation or transfer of a state's own population in a territory it occupies. This exercise by India also constitutes a breach of Additional Protocol 1. The Statute of International Criminal Court says that such transfers, direct or indirect, constitute war crimes. Several resolutions of the United Nations Security Council, UN General Assembly, and UN Human Rights Commission declare such illegal transfers and implantation of settlers and settlements unlawful, and that the state undertaking such an exercise, as well as individuals taking decisions on its behalf, will have criminal responsibility. The applicable law for the illegal demographic changes in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir are absolutely clear. But if one just reads Article 2 of the 1948 Genocide Convention, one recognizes that crimes of genocide mentioned in it depict the situation in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Article 2 defines genocide as any of the acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, including acts to kill members of the group and deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. That is what is happening in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The majority of the people of the disputed state are Muslims who aspire to decide their political future by exercising their right to self-determination. India has chosen to crush their aspirations, crush the aspirations of the entire Kashmiri nation. It is now in the process of changing the Kashmiri nation itself. India is altering the occupied territory to a Hindu Rashtra. This is unacceptable. The people of Jammu and Kashmir have vowed they would not let this happen. The world is aware of the heinous, punishable crimes the BJP RSS regime is committing in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. India's crimes against humanity have been highlighted by the world media, influential parliaments, and civil society organizations. The irony is that despite this overwhelming evidence, world's most powerful nations, who present themselves as custodians of human rights law, have not moved, and they have no intention to move. That is the most daunting challenge that the people of Jammu and Kashmir in Pakistan are facing today. We have garnered some support in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and made some success in attracting the attention of the United Nations Security Council. But besides issuing carefully crafted statements, the decision makers in the international community have not moved with speed to address the most serious human rights and humanitarian crisis on earth today in the territory of Jammu and Kashmir. The crimes by Indian occupation authorities are continuing unabated as we speak. Demographic changes are being used to vaporizing the old state and make a new one. We too should move out of closed room meetings and diplomatic chambers, because the crimes being committed in Kashmir are crimes against humanity. I believe that the Kashmir movement has to be turned into an international civil rights movement to get Kashmiris out of this living inferno. It has to be a people's movement at the global level. The international community is fully aware of the crimes being committed by India in the occupied territory, and yet it chooses to look the other way. This is complicity. This is dereliction of legal obligations. Let's activate the political pincer worldwide with the participation of diaspora community and international civil society to demand justice for Kashmiris. I'm afraid there are no shortcuts. I wish you a successful webinar.
Okay, well, all I can say is thank you very much to the President of Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Now, he has, I think, raised several questions. Some of them relate to the jurisprudence also of the Kashmir case. That's why I will now turn over to Dr. Syed Nazir Gilani in London, for a legal and jurist perspective. I think he has something prepared for himself, but I would also throw just a couple of questions for him to start off, or perhaps keep this at the back of his mind after he is done with his presentation. That has the Indian illegal occupation in August 2009 made the Kashmir case at the United Nations irrelevant? To what extent has it diluted that case? Secondly, no country has asked India to reverse its illegal act starting on August 5, 2019. What does it really mean for Kashmiris and their future? So it's over to Dr. Nazir Gilani.
Thank you. At the very outset, I would wish to thank, on behalf of Jammu and Kashmir Council for Human Rights and the diaspora, Imtiaz Gul, the Executive Director of Center for Research, Security and Studies, and his team for putting together this very important webinar at a time when the habitat and the people of the state of Jammu and Kashmir remain under siege. It was very interesting, and you have done a commendable job by getting an input from Srinagar, from the Indian occupied Kashmir, and Honorable President made a very important input, and he has raised some very important questions on the subject. To start with, I would just clarify certain basics, because the Article 3.5a is a consequence of a presidential order that was made in 1954. But prior to that, these states, or the state of Jammu and Kashmir, had a provisional accession with India, which was a dominion at that point. On 26th of October 1947, India was a dominion, Pakistan was a dominion in 48. When India graduated to become a republic, and then the question came that the question of human rights or equity between the various states, people of various states, and Jammu and Kashmir did feature as a principal state. The state of Jammu and Kashmir in 1954, under this order, it did not accept the Indian constitution at all, except the supervision of three subjects. So what was agreed that this Jammu and Kashmir will have its own constitution. No other state of India had its own constitution. But in that constitution, 54 protected, 35A protected the 5-year-old state subject law. The state subject law, which was promulgated on 20th of April 1927, when there was no India, no Indian constitution. So it bars the people who are non-Kashmiris from property rights in Kashmir. An Indian cannot have property rights in Kashmir. He cannot vote in the local elections of Kashmir, but now they vote for the parliamentary seats. The Indians cannot, or the foreigners cannot have jobs in Kashmir. They cannot have scholarships. So there were 4 protections: property rights exclusive to the state subjects, voting rights exclusive to the people of Kashmir, jobs to be retained for the people of Kashmir, and scholarships for the people of Kashmir. What happened in 2014? The RSS instigate or encouraged a local NGO in Delhi, Citizens with Citizens. So they challenged Article 35A. At the same time, there were other groups as well. The petitions were clubbed together. So from 2014, there is a case pending in the Supreme Court of India that this should be scrapped. There should be equity. Indians should be able to go to Kashmir and they should be able to buy the property, have the voting rights, have the jobs, and have the scholarships. But Indian Supreme Court, and because there are jurists, they are fettered by UN resolution of 30th of March 1951. It cautions India and the state government that you are elected from only a territory and you are not a representative government. So the government of Srinagar cannot enter into any arrangement with the government of India, which is at war with the UN resolutions. So India found out a way. They dissolved the Kashmir Assembly in 2018 because after or as a consequence to Article 370, no Indian order or promulgation can be enforced in Kashmir unless it is blessed by the state legislature. So they had to remove the state legislature first. So they dissolved the state legislature in 2014 November. And they lied on 2 counts. As you very rightly said, that India has a history of deceit and lies. They lied in the first place. Mehbooba Mufti did stakes. She said that I have majority, I'm able to form the government. Sajadun also said that I also have the backing of majority, so I should be allowed to form the government. What they did, they in a way impeded this request. They said that we did not receive your request that you have the majority available, so we are dissolving the state assembly. So that was first lie. That was in a way structured by the governor of the state at the highest level. They did mess around with the fax machine, but they did even WhatsApp the request. What the Srinagar government should have done, they should have gone to the Supreme Court or to the High Court challenging the credentials of the governor of the state, who is an Indian, that he has disenfranchised us and he has committed a fraud against the state legislature and against the population of the state by fiddling with the facts. But they did not do it, they left it at that point. In February 2019, as you rightly said, that India is trained and given to tactical actions and deceits and lies, they put out the biggest lie in the legislative history of the state. They said that the government of the state of Jammu and Kashmir has approved the following proposals. So there was no government in the state in February 2019 because the assembly was dissolved in 2018 and it was taken over by the governor, then directly by the president of India through his representative. So in a way, what the state legislature had to do, they did it through the governor, who was an appointee of the Indian government. So in a way, at this point, there is no government in Kashmir. The people of the state of Jammu and Kashmir are not represented in the state government. So it is an Indian who is in a way acting in entirety as a government. So this is unlawful because it is called committing a fraud against the constitution or against the state legislature, where you are telling to the world that the government of the state of Jammu and Kashmir has approved this, but there is no government. So what are the risks? The risks are that the new order says that the migrants in Kashmir, they have created categories. Now the migrants in the state who have been there for 15 years can be domiciles. Central government employees who have been there for 10 years, they can have a domicile and their children can have a domicile. Indian Armed Forces who have been there for 10 years and their children can have their own domicile, and a student who has been studying in Srinagar or in any part of the valley or the state under Indian occupation after 7 years can have a domicile. So this is in a way exactly as the Israelis did in 1952 by reverting the Palestinian citizenship order into a nationality order. And as you said that the Kashmiris have to sign a bond. It is exactly the same because the Israelis also asked the Palestinians to sign the minimum loyalty bond. So India is roller skating the politics and the philosophy in Kashmir along the same lines as the Israelis are doing in Palestine. But the problem with India is very a bit aggravated. First, that the Indian actions in Kashmir have no lawful authority, as the president very rightly said. India has aggressed again, invaded, and reoccupied. He used the word reoccupation. I think it's very, and he also used the word illegally annexed. So, what needs to be done? That the Indian action is unlawful even within the Indian legal framework. The state legislature is supreme. The President of India cannot introduce any act in Kashmir unless it is also equally blessed by the state legislature. What are the risks? The risk, as I think you also pointed out, is that to disturb the population. And it can be disturbed, and it's very easy to disturb the population because we know in Quebec, it was only, I think, 3,000 votes that were less for independence. So if India is running on a fast track, because if the domicile has to be given in 15 days, and an erring officer, if he is a Kashmiri or anyone, if he delays the issuance of a domicile certificate, he can be fined 50,000 rupees, and those 50,000 could be deducted from his salary. So there is a coercive regime that India wants to put in place so that it intimidates the bureaucracy, it demoralizes the state people by putting them under siege and by unlawfully annexing, because this Indian annexation has no legal blessing, and India does not have a competence to go for the kind of actions that it has gone in Kashmir. I would here point out that we have this state subject protection for the last 95 years. So it is a law which India cannot assail, they cannot savage. It is. And on 4th of February 1948, at the 240th meeting of the UN Security Council, Argentina has clearly pointed out that India and Pakistan have submitted to the jurisdiction of the Security Council. But the Security Council is also not free. Security Council can only act within the framework of the UN Charter. So the principle of self-determination and equality of people in Kashmir has been accepted by the United Nations. So there's no way that India can, at any point, other than coercing a small population, because the Azad Kashmir population is outside the scope of Indian actions. Gilgit and Baltistan is outside their scope. Diaspora is outside their scope. 2.5 million refugees living in various provinces of Pakistan are outside the scope of India. So Kashmir is not only the little part that is currently occupied by India or India has annexed it unlawfully. Kashmir is the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So India has to either go to war against all these entities, the diaspora, the 2.5 million refugees, the people of Azad Kashmir, the GBP people. So it is not as it seems, but India can create problems if we do not act quick. As government of Pakistan did move to the United Nations in May 2020, they did write to the UN Secretary General and the Security Council about the demographic change program of India, but that's not enough, because writing a letter is one thing and setting into action a UN mechanism against India is quite a different thing. What we need to do, that we need to challenge, or not in military terms, but we need to invoke all the international, as the President very rightly said, all the laws. But I do not agree with the statement, or with the understanding that we have to make the Kashmir an international civil rights movement. It is an international civil rights movement accepted by the United Nations. It has the blessing of 194 countries. It has the blessing of all the permanent members and non-permanent members of the Security Council. It has gone to the point of holding a plebiscite in Kashmir, and the government of India does not have any input. The plebiscite has to be arranged, conducted by the government of Jammu and Kashmir, a UN Commission, UN plebiscite advisor, and the United Nations Secretary General. India had a very minimal role of providing law and order facilities, but that too is questionable, because if the state, Jammu and Kashmir, and the plebiscite advisor and the commission say that we are able to maintain law and order, we don't need the Indian soldiers anymore. Even the last Indian soldier can be removed from the state. And
May I request Dr. Saab just to wrap up, if you could kindly wrap up before we take a couple of questions.
So we have to go back to the United Nations and ask the United Nations what is the merit of the UN resolution of 30th of March 1951, which has cautioned India. Then we have to go back to the UN Security Council and ask them what are the merits of the UN Security Council resolution of 21st April 1948, which restrains Indian Army in Kashmir. And then we have to also say that since we couldn't put through the UN supervised vote before 1st of November 1950, how are we going to defend the people of Kashmir who do not have their own defense?
Okay. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. And Dr. Nazir Gilani actually is a living encyclopedia on the jurisprudence of Kashmir, and he remembers all the dates, resolutions so vividly. And he has really distinguished himself with that excellent knowledge on the Kashmir case. Thank you very much. There are a couple of questions, Dr. Saab, because I am not a Kashmiri, so I will not take up those questions. I will leave it basically to you to respond to that. One question from one of our guests, Rahimullah, is if the United Nations knows that India is violating the human rights in Kashmir, then why the UN is not taking action against India? as we know from the beginning of to tell UN haven't taken any serious action. And the second question is, now there are a lot of questions actually. Can Aruba handle this? And there's a second question. It appears that the world and the UN are largely powerless to act against these atrocities in any capacity. In the absence of this impetus, what are our legal options? Another question is it just a matter of sustained information campaigns to highlight the plight of the Kashmiri people until something comes of it? So I'll just pass on, Dr.
Gulsab, there are two things that we have created a misunderstanding at the United Nations, because in 48, India and Pakistan have submitted before the UN that we have failed in bilateral engagement under Article 33. So please help us. So both countries had to revert to Article 33, bilateral engagement. It's permissible under the UN Charter. So they failed, they have admitted the failure. Then after Shimla and some other agreements between India and Pakistan, a climate was created and UN has been given to understand that we are capable to engage with each other and resolve the issue. So that provision was reactivated of considering Kashmir under Article 33 bilateral engagement, but that has to be given a time frame. It cannot be infinite. And India and Pakistan have again failed. But Pakistan has to take courage. Pakistan has to turn its back on India and go to United Nations that we have again failed in bilateral engagements. We need the United Nations to activate Article 103, which prevails. If there is a failure in bilateral engagements, then the Article 103 takes over. So Pakistan has to graduate into a final distinction and more accurate wisdom and take the case accordingly. Because if we continue to give to UN an impression that all is okay, still the 5th of August 2019 action has not been proportionately challenged as is provided under the UN resolution. So we have to assist the United Nations and force them that we have again failed. So let's go to 103. The other one was options.
It's about information campaign, whether that information campaign is enough. And also, if I may supplement that question, because we're asking about wondering about the options for Pakistan. Options, what options does really Pakistan have if none of the other countries are supporting it as far as, or supporting the people of Kashmir?
Pakistan has a number of options. Pakistan should encourage the Srinagar political cadre and ask them to make a reference to the United Nations that we were to conduct a plebiscite in cooperation with the United Nations Plebiscite Advisor and the Commission. Number one. Pakistan has to point out to the United Nations that Indian Army was permitted to be in Kashmir under 3 restraints, but under the supervision of the UNSIP Commission. Since the Commission could not be put in place, there is no Commission, so UN has to consider the legitimacy of Indian Army both on the basis of pre-UN arrangements and post-UN. Even in the pre-UN arrangement with the government of Kashmir, the Indian Army was given a very specific role. And that role was reversed when there was a ceasefire on 1st of January 1949. So the pretext under which the Indian Army entered Kashmir, it was altogether reversed by that ceasefire agreement between India and Pakistan under the supervision of the UN. So Pakistan has a broad spread of options. Pakistan can also ask the Azad Kashmir government to write a letter to the UN that we want to revive the Azad Kashmir army. Azad Kashmir had its own army, its own forces. So those forces were unarmed under the UN arrangement. So if you do not defend, if you do not help the people of Kashmir, if you do not create their defense, then they have a right um, to defend themselves.
Okay. If there's one question.
Just 1 second.
So there are two more questions. One is from Adnan Ashraf saying that isn't UN just hasn't UN just become a silent spectator in case of underdeveloped countries, and we behave like a law-abiding country for UN directions? Means contemporary era would know the Indian true face. So maybe you can make out what Nansa wants to ask. And second question is the atrocities and vicious acts may go worse as Pakistan continues to support the resistance in Kashmir, the way it happens in peripheral Pakistan as well. What would you think?
After Imtiaz Gul sir, I think we have been a bit too casual about the United Nations, because we are forgetting the fact that the first time the Secretary General of the United Nations visited Kashmir was in March 1959. So UN had a very robust interest in Kashmir. So from March 59 to date, we haven't done much to agitate, to flag our misery or our case. The other thing is that we did not raise Kashmir at the United Nations for 32 years. People do not like me to repeat or to remind them. From November 1965 to August 1996, for 31, 32 years, we did not raise Kashmir at the UN. So it has not had the right amount of push at the UN. So United, and again, after 59, in 2018 and 2019, UN again produced two massive reports on the human rights violations in Kashmir. So we have not used those two reports so far. Those two reports should have been a subject matter of the Azad Kashmir Assembly, Azad Kashmir government, and I think we have, in a way, decided to load Pakistan with all the responsibilities that they will do this or they will do that. We can do parallel to Pakistan, we can complement the efforts of the Pakistan government, support them, but we are the principal voice. The principal voice is sitting silent, dormant. We say the Foreign Office did not do this. The Foreign Minister did. The Foreign Minister wrote a letter in May 2020 informing the United Nations about these changes. But that is one action. You did intimate, you did communicate your grievance, but you have to follow it up. The consequence has not been there.
Okay. There's one question, the last question, two questions. One is by HP. War is solution to Kashmir issue or not? And this guest is quoting the Azerbaijan and Armenian dispute, the recent one. And there's a question by Mahnur Ishtiaq. Are there really any hopes to remain with, should we basically attach any hopes to the United Nations? She's asking because Pakistan's economy or public health supports this stance of Pakistan on international level. Rationality says that India will always be the mainstream actor as its economy continues to flourish.
I think Pakistan has every opportunity and every possibility to turn the table. It was Pakistan that gave long-term developmental loan to West Germany in early 1960s. So Pakistan also was a very important and is a very important, is a nuclear state. Kashmir should not be linked with the economic or political climate in Pakistan. It should be taken as a right of self-determination sitting on in the files of the UN Security Council, and there had to be a plebiscite before 1st of November 1950. All the arrangements were in place. We have to unfreeze this situation and reactivate it. It's not that at that point, if Russia vetoed the right of self-determination, they did not veto, because my interface with them reveals that they were scared of America and Britain. They thought that possibly they are going to to do something sinister in Kashmir against Russia. Basically, Russia would never vote against the right of a people to self-determination. The vote at that point was against the political muscle of Great Britain and the United States of America. In today's, if today we move and go and meet the Russians, the think tanks, use the your CRSS and request you to marshal our case at the international forum as you have done today, because Kashmir should be handed over to think tanks, to intellectuals, to lawyers, to people of good understanding who can advocate and interface with the rest of the world, because it's not an American case, a British case. Although Britain has said that this is the gravest single outstanding issue at the UN. But when there is a reply in the House of Commons, the minister from Foreign Office says, we have left it to India and Pakistan to resolve it. That is Article 33, bilateral engagement, but it has failed. As it failed in 1947-48, then both countries went to UN, and both have accepted the jurisdiction of the UN Security Council. So
okay, no doubt, both countries have accepted the jurisdiction.
Yes.
There are two last questions. I see here Zulfikar Durrani from Quetta. Dr. Gilani Saab, do you think Pakistan needs to revisit its policy towards Kashmir issue, keeping in view its vivid failures on Kashmir fronts? What would you suggest to relevant authorities in Pakistan? And another question by Kinza Fatima. Do you think the issue of Kashmir is actually about the identity between India and Pakistan, which is a virulent manifestation of competing for identities and contest for power?
Can you, sir, repeat the second question?
The second question, do you think the issue of Kashmir is actually the issue of national identities between India and Pakistan? So it's whether it's an identity issue between the two countries,
Okay.
which is a virulent manifestation of competing for identities and contest for power.
Thank you. Durrani Saab has, in answer to Durrani Saab's question, to revisit the policy. My understanding is that the government of Pakistan does not have a credible, a reliable Kashmir policy at all, because it is proven from the fact that we failed to offer a proportionate and pointed response to India or Indian action of 5th of August 2019. Statements are one thing, but you have to come up with a proportionate and pointed action to vacate the Indian aggression. The first and the easiest thing is that the government of Azad Kashmir should assume itself, as has been provided under UNCIP resolutions, under the guidance of government of Pakistan. Government of Azad Kashmir has to be given the role that is envisaged of it. It's very important. And government of Pakistan has to lead the government of Azad Kashmir, hold its hand and take it through. Because the only two contacts of Kashmiris with the UN have been, or three, have been: one, when Sheikh Abdullah addressed the Security Council; second, when President of Azad Kashmir wrote a letter to the chairman of the UNCIP in July 1948, or when in September the UNCIP Commission came to Azad Kashmir. barring these 3 occasions or 2 occasions from Azad Kashmir side, Azad Kashmir government has never had the opportunity to even enter the threshold of the United Nations, because you NGOs go there. We have taken a government of Azad Kashmir to United Nations, to the Human Rights Commission and the Council, but the matter has to be taken with more with authority, with commitment, and we need to be robust. And government of Pakistan needs to go in accordance with the jurisprudence of UN resolutions. They support Pakistan quite a lot, and they don't support India as people normally understand. As Fatima ji has said, that competing, because the current fight with India is that a Kashmiri can be an Indian, but an Indian cannot be a Kashmiri under state subject law of 20th of April 1927. Kashmiris are far different than the Indians. So there is no identity question. There is a question of equality of people and right of self-determination. India and Pakistan have a dispute, a claim, but the people of the state of Jammu and Kashmir have a title to right of self-determination. So there is a difference between having a title and a claim. If I do not have a title, there is no consequence of accession. Nazir Gilani needs to have a title to self-determination to accede to Pakistan. Or somebody needs to have a title to accede to India, or whatever. So to say that it is India or Pakistan do not have an identity question in regard to Kashmir. They have that both the countries, Pakistan has said at the UN that acceding to India amounts to signing a death warrant. So Pakistan has to remember what it has submitted at the UN. If in 47 accession was a death warrant, so after August 5, 2019, Pakistan should revisit, as Durrani Sahab said, because if it was a death warrant at that point, at today it's far worse than that. So Pakistan has a higher burden of responsibility. Think tanks like you, sir, have a responsibility. People like Durrani Sahab, Fatima, and others. We all have individually, because even the Security Council has said, if you have had the opportunity to go through the debates, the Security Council has told Pakistan that we have heard India and Pakistan, but we advise you to take the Kashmir case to the people of the world as well. Mm-hmm. It's very crucial. United Nations Security Council has advised Pakistan that you need to talk to the broader world outside the Security Council.
Only if the world would listen to Pakistan. This is one of the questions coming from one Shoaib Khan, which says that, as you know, that Pakistan has multi-pronged foreign policy. In some areas like Palestine, it has been supporting them, and in some areas like in Kurdistan in Turkey, it has not. So he calls it a duality of Pakistan's foreign policy. And there's another friend from the SDPI, who is asking about possible allies in the current circumstances as to who would be beneficial, like China, Iran, Turkey. So if you could kindly wrap up within 2 minutes, and then we have to basically close this conversation.
Shoaib Saab and others, I would end with 3 things. America has said that we have a positive duty in Kashmir. We mean Security Council. So France has said that both have agreed, there are agreements between India and Pakistan, they will have to return to UN resolutions. If there is still a disagreement, then we will go for arbitration or to ICJ. Likewise, Netherlands has said that if either of the 2 countries runs away from the agreed principles at the UN Security Council, that country will be committing a grave offense against another party and UN and the people of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So what we need to do, we need to study what are the positives and pluses available to us at the UN, and we have a lot. And I can assure Shoaib Saab and others that Kashmiris have not even used an iota of UN jurisprudence that favors them, because even the UN resolutions define the people of Kashmir. As somebody said, that identity, we are the only people at the UN who have been defined as a people uh, of legend with a song and a story. So this is what UN has said about the people of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. My request to all your listeners or who have tuned in, that we need to understand the case as it stands at the UN, because people have misgivings, misunderstandings about the role of the UN. UN is what you make out of it, how you agitate it, which countries do. It's not necessary that America should be our friend. We can encourage non-permanent members of the UN Security Council. For example, we should have opposed the Indian um, seat at the UN because they have assumed their seat at the UN Security Council as a non-permanent member. We could have very easily made out a case that India does not qualify for this seat for the following reasons, because the reasons are given in the charter. I think
Okay.
we need to keep faith, and faith can move the mountains. The only thing is that Kashmiris have a habit of outsourcing their responsibility. We say India did this, Pakistan did this. We need to move deep into Pakistan. We need to go to various universities, law centers, think tanks, and network internationally as well. And
Okay.
for that reason, uh, possibly I will make a quick comment. We had a debate on 13th of January in the House of Commons. 12 members of parliament spoke on Kashmir. But I was surprised. None of them addressed the Indian administered Kashmir as Indian occupied Kashmir. On the contrary, one member said about Azad Kashmir that it is Pakistan occupied Kashmir, because we do not prepare the members of the parliament. They are not bothered about the terminology. We don't explain to them what is an occupation. As our president very rightly said, on 5th of August 2019, India has aggressed against the people of Kashmir. It is an invasion, it is an reoccupation, and it is something that has never happened from 1947 to date.
So perfectly described. There's a need to repackage and remarket the Kashmiri narrative anchored in the United Nations resolutions. And there's a question actually from Nizara Kabir, but I will shortly respond to that. The question is, at this time where India is completely dominated by RSS ideology, can India set to dialogue with Pakistan? Well, I would say it's, under the current circumstances, it's extremely difficult. Doesn't look possible at the moment that India would basically step forward for resumption of dialogue with Pakistan. They are in a different mood, and they perhaps have also been encouraged by the silence of the world. And as Gilani Saab has just said, that none of the 12 UK parliamentarians basically spoke of the Indian occupied Kashmir, but they did speak of the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and this basically explains the shortcomings in Pakistan's advocacy, Pakistan's marketing of the Kashmir cause and the case. And I think, as he also pointed out, that for 32 years, the Pakistani government officially did not take up or speak of Kashmir. 32 long years, and that's how this was the space that Pakistan basically ceded to outsiders, to India in particular, to poison the minds of the other countries, and that's how they basically bought into the Kashmiri, the Indian narrative on Kashmir. So there are many pitfalls ahead, many risks, many challenges for Kashmiris as well as for Pakistan, and we will just hope that somehow everybody starts talking and acting on behalf of Kashmir, for Kashmir, and perhaps how do you say, jogging the minds of the conscience of the global community at the United Nations, in New York, in Geneva, and in Brussels at the European Parliament. So with that, I will thank Dr. Nazir Gilani and all.
Could I add one thing, that could you kindly convey our sense of gratitude to your team for the continuous and very useful contribution that your center has been making in sensitizing the question and broadening the constituency of support on Kashmir. You are doing Herculean service to Pakistan and to the humankind, people who are under siege, and we thank you for that.
No, thank you very much. It is our pleasure, and our team has done excellent preparation for this webinar, and we are looking forward to basically doing more. And I would like to thank everybody, all the guests who tuned in, and also our team, as well as Dr. Gilani. And if somebody from the President Azad Kashmir is listening or watching, with thanks also to Sardar Masood Khan. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.